Well, welcome everybody to Cornwall Heritage Trust third Story Cafe. And this evening we're delighted to welcome Laura Garcia and Richard Trethewey from the Rowan Tree, who are going to talk about Kolar Gold, their multimedia project on the Cornish diaspora in India. And tonight's Story Cafe has got a special meaning for me because my grandparents from Perranporth lived at Kolar Gold Fields during the 1930s and 40s. My grandfather was a mining engineer and my mum was born there. So this Story Cafe will be recorded and we'll also be live streaming to the Cornwall Heritage Trust Facebook page. So once the video has been edited next week, we'll upload it to our YouTube channel and also on our website, so you can watch it again at your leisure and you can share it with anyone who wasn't able to come along tonight. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions and share your stories at the end of Laura and Richard's presentation. But in the meantime, we'd be really grateful if you could keep your microphones on mute during the recording. And you might want to set up the speaker window rather than the gallery window so you can see Laura's presentation as the main screen. So if we get started, we are now live broadcasting on Facebook and I'm going to hand over to you, Laura and Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Hello, everyone. We will take turns to speak as we go through the slides. We will be sharing some stories from the project, but I guess our main story tonight really is the project itself. I'm not sure how many people will have heard about it who are here tonight. So yeah, it'll be a mixture. We'll have a few clips of music and a little bit of video as well. But I think Rich is going to start us off.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. So we did a version of this talk for the Bangalore International Centre a few months ago now. I can't remember when. And we gave them a lot of information about Cornish emigration because most of the people there didn't know about the Cornish diaspora and Cornish mining. So just going to highlight a couple of key things because I think our audience tonight probably know a little bit more about the places the Cornish went. But of course, the Cornish were the world leaders in hard rock mining, and one of the key facts and one of the key figures that kind of gets bounded about with Cornish emigration is that between 1861 and 1901, Cornwall lost over 250,000 people to emigration, mostly men who were seeking work in the United States and Canada, Australia, Mexico, New Zealand, South Africa, Brazil, Chile, and there were Cornish associations in all these places. But when you talk about that emigration, the story of the Cornish that left and went to India is seldom mentioned. So that was one of the things we wanted to address with this project and kind of shine a light on, and hopefully inspire other people to look into that story. One of the key things that I always love about the Cornish emigration, and one of the best stories that I will share with you guys as well, is that the Cornish introduced football to Mexico. That the first ever Mexican football team was made up exclusively of Cornish miners, and they won in 1904 and 1905. They won the first ever Mexican football tournament, and to this day Pachuca is still the home of Mexican football, and they've rather eclipsed our football talent and offerings, I would say. But wherever the Cornish went, they always took their sports, so football and wrestling, Cornish wrestling, and their food, the saffron buns and cakes and all of that stuff, and their music with them. And this is another picture from our other presentation, which shows my granny Mona Trethewey, who's a bard of Cornwall, and this is when she went to Australia in 1992, and then she went back in 2002, and this was in South Australia at Burra, which was a copper mining area, and these were dugouts that the Cornish actually had to go and live in, because they couldn't afford the accommodation that was on offer in Australia. So they had to burrow into the side of the riverside. And there were up to 1,500 people living in these conditions in about 1850. So we just wanted to show you that picture, just to show you the kind of places that the Cornish went, and that things weren't always easy when they got there, shall we say. And then this picture, of course, is just one of my favourite pictures, showing, in this case, it was the Cornish emigrating and going to South Africa. And this is Redruth train station. And so on the outgoing platform, on the platform itself is nearly entirely men, and then up on the wall above them are nearly entirely women in hats and finery to wave off the men. And the incoming platform on the other side is completely empty. And I think it just completely summarises the story of emigration, really.
Okay, so onto the project. This was where the project very first started. I used to rent out my house in the summer to holiday makers, and me and my whole family would go live in this tiny caravan. And there was a week, one August, where it just rained every day, and I was searching through iPlayer and found a program about Indian music, and it just really inspired me. So I did a search whether there were any links between Cornwall and India, and found very little other than Indian restaurants in Cornwall. But far down the page, there were the words Kolar Gold Fields. So I looked into it a bit and realised there was hardly any information about it, but obviously it had been a place that Cornish miners had gone. So then I think the next stage was messaging all the guys in the band saying, "It's this really interesting thing, like, do you think we should explore it?" And everyone said yes. And so we decided that before we could take it further, we actually needed to find out if there was anything in it, and do some research. So for 6 months before the project officially began, we did some really thorough research. We found these various books you can see here. There are some really good books written about the Kolar Gold Fields, nothing from the Cornish point of view. These were written by Indian authors, and just gave a really comprehensive picture. The Kolar Gold Fields are about 100 kilometres from Bangalore, and various people found gold there, but it was really John Taylor and Sons in the late 1800s who set up the mines there, and they had worked and run mines in Cornwall, so they were really keen to get Cornish miners over there for their skill. So they drafted in Cornish miners and engineers, and most of the higher positions were Cornish. So we read these books, and then I emailed the authors of the books, who hopefully you can see on the slides, and they were all incredibly supportive. They all gave so much information and time, and the photos of them on the slide are when I actually got to meet them in India. I emailed Philip Payton, who's written the Cornish Overseas, and he gave me one of the best pieces of advice, which was look on the British newspaper archives, which you can see on this slide. And that was a revelation, because they were reporting in Cornwall on the Kolar Gold Fields weekly. They reported who went out there and when they came back for their leave. They reported concerts, they reported the food the Cornish ate out in India. They reported on marriages, births, deaths, who was at weddings, what people wore, like incredibly detailed picture of life there. So most of the stories that influenced the project actually came from that source. We've got all these resources on our website if anyone wants to look into them further. Research together, and the project had actually begun properly. The website was one of the first things we put together, and has been one of the key things really in making sure the project has happened the way it has. So we did just a about section, and a history of KGF, which was we were helped to write that by the historians in India, and that still hundreds of people every day are looking at that. So that's quite interesting. The stories on there, we will touch on some stories tonight, but if you would like them in more detail or to see a wider range of stories we collected, you can find them on the website. On the resources page, we have some wonderful letters from Alison's grandfather that he sent back from India to Cornwall, which are amazing. And it's very kind of the family to let us put them on there. We've got a list of all the Cornish miners we know who are out there. We're still getting people contacting us with new names all the time, but that's kind of as up to date as it is so far. We have a list of all the music that we know was either played or sung there as well. There's a blog where we documented the project as we went along, and then the Get Involved page that has been crucial. Really, we have had so many people getting in touch with their personal stories from all around the world. These are just some of the countries where people have contacted us from, and there's more besides that as well. It's been really extraordinary to see what a kind of global community it is that have a connection to KGF and the Kolar Gold Fields. And it's one thing that really comes through in all the communications is how important the place is to people, even if it was several generations back that family had been there, and people have mementos and stories passed down. So there really is this link between people all around the world, which is wonderful. So once we'd done our research, set up the website, we'd realised very early on that you can't do a project about a place in India without actually having been there. There was, well, I suppose it would be possible, but we just didn't feel it would be as authentic, really. So we couldn't all go. So first of all, Tom went out there with his wife, who's a filmmaker, and we produced a little documentary for the project as well, which a lot of the footage came from their visit. He was shown around by two local men and got a tour of KGF, and he got to meet some of the locals and find out what life is like there now, because the mines closed in 2001. So most of the Cornish had left by the 1950s, though some were there till the 80s. And then it was taken over by the Indian government. But in 2001, the mines closed, and it's a very different place now. It's a place where people are incredibly proud, but there's also, it's just been left really to ruin. There's still a community there, people still live there, but there's no work. So most people have to travel to Bangalore to find work. So that really came across when we went there. So that was Tom's visit. And then a month later, I went over there myself for a number of reasons, really. One was to meet with the historians that had been helping us with the project. So I don't know if you might be able to see my mouse. We have Gayatri Chandrasekhar here, Bridget Kumar over here. Down at the bottom here, this is Neil Joseph, who is one of the founders of the KGF Schools Foundation, which is where half the proceeds from the project will be directed. And he showed me round KGF. He took me there for a day. He showed me the work of the Schools Foundation, which provides education to children who couldn't afford to pay for school, which is the system over there most do. They raise all the money themselves. They also work in the community, improving soil quality and air quality and things like that. So that was one purpose for being there. The other, as you can probably see from this picture, was recording. We were working with this guy here, Venki DC. He was our main point of contact in India, and he was leading the recording process over there. So I spent a few days at his studio laying down guide tracks where I sat with a microphone and pretended to be a guitar, a violin, a flute, just humming along into this microphone, which sounded terrible, but it gave the basis of the track. So we had something that in each country we could work from. We knew the basic structure. Gayatri is a journalist and historian. She wrote one of the books, but during our email correspondence, she also said, "Oh, by the way, I'm a Carnatic singer." So I said, "Oh, that would be quite lovely to have on the album." So we met in person for the first time at Venky's studio, and we actually recorded a full track together, which I'll just talk about briefly. It's called Lead Kindly Light, and the chorus is taken from the hymn Lead Kindly Light, which was really popular with miners. But it was also inspired by various stories. Gayatri gave me a lot of information about women, Indian women that worked at KGF doing very menial tasks, but also the fear they lived in. They lived under, that every time the earth shook or there was a loud bang or anything, they would worry that their husbands, their brothers, their sons might not be coming home. There were a lot of accidents at the mines. There were also incredible health care system over there. So they had a hospital, trained midwives, so the community was really well served. But the song also touches on the Cornish experience. There was a really very moving story we found of a lady called Bessie Hamill, who was a singer in Hale, and her husband was Captain A. Hamill, and she moved out to the Kolar Gold Fields with him in the early 1900s. She only lived there for about 9 months because she gave birth and died shortly after childbirth. But there's a report in the British newspaper archives that just talks about her role in the community, that she played the organ in the chapel at KGF, and was incredibly involved in the community. And it really kind of shone through the community spirit and the fact that these women were traveling thousands of miles, but in India they found a Cornwall of sorts, a community that kept up the same traditions as it did back home. On the track, we wanted to represent the really broad range of women that were at KGF. So I sang some of the verses. Gayatri does some Carnatic singing. We gathered a group of women in Cornwall to sing a verse. And then after the track was finished, I had an email from a girl called Nyla who said, "My aunt has told me about the project. I'd love to be involved somehow." She'd grown up in the Kolar Gold Fields. So she ends up singing the chorus on this track. And when she played it to her mum, who's also from the Kolar Gold Fields, her mum had sung the original hymn Lead Kindly Light every week at her school assemblies. So there are all these sorts of little connections. I'll just play you a minute or so of there's my mouse gone, of the song, so you can hear how those different influences kind of came together. Sorry, it's really, I keep losing my mouse, which isn't ideal. Okay, here we go.
Not for me. The things that we've seen cannot be unseen, but we carry on. Men, women, children, no creed or caste that we will turn away. Our skill and passion, our reputation known throughout the world. For men in danger, looking for saviors, sanctuaries found here. Lead kindly light amid the encircling gloom. Lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home. Lead
have stopped it a bit sooner, but I couldn't find my mouse on the screen. Okay, so obviously the project had to be funded. There was too much work to do and too many musicians involved to do it without funding. We were incredibly grateful to Cornwall Heritage Trust for funding the project in part, and also the Arts Council. So they funded that funding, went on the recording. We'll talk a bit about recording later, but we had over 60 musicians from 2 countries involved on the album. So it went on musician producing of the album, marketing, all of that kind of thing. It didn't fund the trips to India. We funded that ourselves, but everything else involved in the project came from that. So yes, we are very grateful also to be here tonight. But okay, oh, I'm blabbering. Let's go to Richard.
I've got way too comfortable. I'm kind of watching it as a participant now. So yeah, a case study, which is a very personal one on this evening. So we want to try and make this presentation very personal and to kind of highlight the stories that inspired us to do this project. And for myself as a songwriter, it's always when I find incredible stories or people show me incredible stories that I feel inspired to write a song, because I feel that that's another way of documenting it and passing it on. These stories aren't forgotten. And as Laura said, there's been loads of kind of little coincidences along the way with this project of people getting in touch, and as she said, like knowing Lee Kindly Light already, or people that were living at the Kolar Gold Fields at the same time but didn't know it many years ago and are now in touch because of this project. But when we first applied to the Cornwall Heritage Trust, the main coincidence was that it landed with Alison Vick. And so I think when she saw the words Kolar Gold Fields, it was probably a double take, heart beating a little faster perhaps. And so the story that this particular case study follows is her family's story. So as Laura said, Alison's grandfather was out there mining, and he's on, if Laura can wiggle her mouse, if she can find it. Rory's in the front row. There he is. And then, of course, then we were put in touch with Pauline, as Laura said.
Oh, sorry.
Oh. And that's the end of that story. So we were put in touch with Pauline, who was born out in the Kolar Gold Fields. But Arthur Roy Tamblyn and Olive Augusta Westcott were both born and grew up in Perranporth in the early part of the 20th century. And Roy had trained at the Camborne School of Mines and was a mining engineer. He already worked in Portugal, but had recently left the sands of Perranporth for the sands of India. And Olive was working at home in Perranporth, and it was Roy's sister who came into the post office where she was working and wanted to post a parcel off to Roy. But Olive looked at it and didn't admire the packaging very much, and so she took it upon herself to repackage it and sewed it into some material to send out to Roy. And this started a 3-year correspondence and courtship across the continents. I say we are very lucky to have seen a lot of Roy's original letters, and as Laura said, that there's loads of stuff on the website. You can read one of his letters in full there. And he was a fantastic letter writer with so much detail about the journey out there and the temperature of the water and the speed the ship was going. And he talks about seeing whales swimming alongside the ship and the night sky as they went through the Mediterranean. And it's these kind of details that show he was a Cornish engineer, I think. It's the eye for detail. So he wrote about his journey out there, which inspired one of our tracks, the SS Carthage, which I'll touch on later when we give a quick overview of which tracks are on the album. So they had this 3-year long courtship, And then Roy took 6 weeks leave and came back to this country, and they got married, but then returned to India and had 2 children before coming back to this country in 1947. So their daughter Pauline has become a great friend to the band, is constantly very encouraging and supportive. And the song that I wrote based on this story was based partly on the letters, which it was amazing to see and to look through lots of photographs like these ones, but also partly inspired and thanks to one of the first, I think it was the first time I met Pauline. I went over with Laura, and we had a delicious lunch because Pauline's a very good cook and a marvellous host. And Pauline let me record the conversations that we had. And from that, I had first-hand material here, and a lot of the phrases that are in the song Man of Letters are Pauline's memories of being a small girl in India. And she talked about smelling the monsoons coming and the flaming dancing trees, and these are all words that ended up in the song as her recollections. And we'll play you a bit in a second, but this one story, the knock-on effect from this story has been amazing, really, that it inspired Camelford School to do a whole production based on this one story and this song. They turned it into a production that Pauline herself attended, and it involved the school liaising with Givor Tin Mine down in the west of Cornwall and using artefacts from them, being put in touch with a shanty group in North Cornwall, the Boscastle Boys, and being signposted to Cornish songbooks. So it's got a huge life just from one story, which has been a privilege to witness. But I think we'll give you, again, about a minute of this song just so you can get a flavour, and it's quite different. The album is very mixed, and I think it's good to try and show that.
I'm a man of many letters, an engineer by trade. I've walked the sands of Peru, but in India I was made. I told you of our voyage, the wonders that I saw, the ship, the waves, the currents, our arrival on that shore. A parcel from my mother reached this foreign land, packaged so securely by an unfamiliar hand. This work was not my mother's. I wrote to ask her who had wrapped it up so neatly. She told me it was you. We have always walked on sandy roads. Some things are meant to be, whether Perrin or Kolar, no matter how far. Yes, I know they're meant to be.
Okay, sorry to cut that off so briefly. There's no way of like fading it or anything, and we want to leave time for questions, so we're trying to get there's so much in this project. It's really hard to kind of squish it down into one talk, so we'll do our best. So just a quick overview of the music and how it came about. I mentioned we had over 60 musicians. They were split roughly equally between Cornwall and India. So in Cornwall, we had members from Truro Cathedral Choir. We had the Aggie Boys. We had Camborne Town Band. We had lots of other people coming in from Cornwall. And then in India, we had in the bottom corner, you can see a group of men, I suppose I won't call them boys, were gathered around microphones. Venki calls them his boys, which we'll hear shortly. And they're all kind of based around his studio. And there was all these different ways we met these people, some through Venki, some through connections to the Kolar Gold Fields. It was a real mix, but all these people contributed, and I think it made it so much richer than if it had just been the 5 of us. It was really important to us that we represented both cultures evenly. To do the actual recording, we recorded in 3 places. One was Bangalore at Venki's studio, where I began the recording, and then he brought in musicians there. We recorded at a little chapel in Suffolk, where we all met together, and we recorded at Cube Studios in Cornwall and at Camborne Town Band's band room. We took all the equipment there because there's too many of them to fit in the studio. And then it was all put together by Tom, and Brendan helped as well, and then it was sent off to be kind of polished and arranged. So that was how the kind of technical side worked. The internet played a very big role in the technical side. This is the tracks on the album. Rich is just going to take us through some of them.
Just going to give some background and any key information, but a whistle-stop tour. And with this project, a major thing is that a lot of the information, but actually all the music as well, is available online and on the website, as you know, to give as much access to people all over the world, you know, so you can go and listen to it all. But SS Carthage is the opening track, and that was the name of the ship that Roy sailed on in 1935. And Tom, the guitarist in our band, kind of took leadership on this one, and he created an amazing symphony almost, which takes you from this country across the ocean and ends up in India. It's a bit like a desert island disc beginning, I always think. But yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful track. And then 10,000 Miles is a very, very well-known traditional song about emigration, or about just people being separated, actually, rather than emigration. But for us, it really kind of illustrated the change that would have happened for so many families, whether you know, that's couples being separated or whole families. And that this track was the one we recorded with Camborne Town Band. And one of the really interesting little snippets of information with that was that the link with Camborne Band was that there was a brass band competition being held in London in about 1904 or 1905. And Camborne couldn't afford to go, because I guess at that time in Cornwall times were very hard with lack of mining work. So there was a fundraising, a crowdfunder of its day held, and miners from KGF in India sent money back home for Camborne Band to be able to go up to London, and which is an amazing turnaround and just an amazing link. So that's why we wanted them in particular on the album. We've got Lead Kindly Light, Laura's already told you about. Am I Born to Die? We're about to hear the listening party, so I won't spoil that. Minor Jolly is a very interesting instrumental piece that Neil Jolly, who's no relation or connection to the story, but that deals with perhaps the darker side of this whole situation, and the British being in other countries around the world. And that was really important, actually, that this project didn't sugarcoat things too much, and that it was a real representation of what people gave to us, and what we found, which I think was really important. So maybe check that one out on the website and have a listen, because we tried to represent the story purely through music, which is a really interesting way of dealing with it. And then One and All is mostly a traditional song from Cornwall, which then we added extra words to. Neil Jolly added extra words, and that's got the Aggie Boys choir on it, and that's supposed to represent a real life situation where Cornish miners gathered together to make that decision to go out and change their whole life and seek their fortune, which actually happened in a pub down west. And then Treasure is the final track on the album, which it's a bit of a celebration and kind of summarizes a lot of the project. And on that one, we've got some voice clips that people living in KGF or anywhere around the world were free to contribute, and they just recorded them on their phone and WhatsApped them to us so that it was free and kind of as accessible as it could be. And so then we've got real voices from the community interwoven with the music, and it's to celebrate what an amazing place and an important place in world mining and in history KGF was, and to look forward to hopefully a bright future if there could be a bit more infrastructure and a bit of change around what's out there at the moment. So I think that's a whistle-stop tour.
Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit more time on this track, and Am I Born to Die, which is our take on the hymn. We really wanted to recognise the fact that KGF was at times a hard place to be. It was often a dangerous place to work. There were accidents, as there are in mines all around the world. We were particularly influenced by a very sad story we found about a man called William Pelmere, who was in the mine when an air blast occurred, and all the men that he was working with were killed in the accident, and he survived. But it left such a terrible mark on him that he couldn't cope afterwards, and he was sent back to Cornwall. But he didn't improve, and after I think it was a week of being home, he actually committed suicide. And we felt it was really tragic, such a tragic story, but really just highlights what these people were actually living through and what they were going through. And we felt it important to recognise that. And actually a few weeks ago we had an email from, I think it was his great niece, who had heard his story through the family, but heard slightly different versions, and it's just that feeling like actually he's still being spoken about. He's still in people's memory. His memory's still being honoured. So that was just one of the many stories we found that made us want to do this track. A few months ago we did a listening party where all the band gathered on Zoom with Venki DC, our partner in India, in Bangalore, and we talked through each track about how it came about, how the technicalities and the things behind it. And we just wanted to share this one clip with you of Am I Born to Die, because I think this track, it's got all the elements of the album in one go, probably. So I will say no more, and I will share that video. If I can find my mouse. Oh, here we go. Shall we talk about Am I Born to Die?
Yeah.
Which is, like, for me, this was organisationally, which is a little boring take on it. It was really tricky just because there's so many people involved in this track, from in the UK and in India. We had the choral scholars, didn't we? We had Jessica Quinones on flute, and then we had Pooja Prakash Raj vocals, and then your guys, Venki, who did, like, when we heard that particular verse they'd sung, it blew us away because they are so tight.
Yeah.
It was like you'd taken one voice and layered it up electronically, but they were all singing live. We've got the video, so we know they were all singing, but it sounds almost electronic because they are so together. Was it like, did it take a lot of work to get that so perfect?
Not at all. Like, they means I explained the whole thing and they digested it. And the thing is, whenever these boys, I call them the boys because it's like they're all of same age. and some of them are like they just completed their studies and they're getting into new jobs, but their upbringing is very strong in the Indian classical music. So they have a very beautiful, like tuned ear,
Yeah.
very much conditioned. And the moment I sing, their melody sense is so strong that they decipher it very soon. So and the moment they understand it, then they start playing around and they are like joking around each other and pulling each other's legs. And I tell, take one, ready, one shot. Take two, like adding up, adding up some layers, four or two layers. I did it, and that's it. Then had same, the Indian food and enjoy. It was a good thing. Because of you, we had a get together after a long time.
Oh, that's good. I
Because of this
recognised
project, rather.
when I saw the video of them recording it, I thought, oh, I recognise some of them from when I was there.
Yeah. In the video, they're serious.
Say again?
In the video, they are like pretty serious, but the moment the video is off, you should see them.
I think the thing that's really, really clear is that with all these sort of the collaborators, all these excellent guys again, we are very much the weak links.
Yeah.
The talent of the people we got to work with has been incredible. It really has.
I love the strings, the vina and the beautiful little string bits that were added into the verses as well.
Beautiful.
Really, really good.
Love this.
Hearing that about your boys and your choir, it's amazing the similarity between the choral scholars on the final verse, actually, that they've got such an amazing training in classical music that they had sheet music for it, but had never seen the sheet music before, had never heard the song, and they sung it. And we did it in one take, I think, and then
they practiced, I think, twice, and then did one or two takes. It wasn't.
But I think we did. I think we added takes because you feel you should.
Yeah.
I think it's like, well, that seemed fine, but we'll do another take because,
just in case. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was.
So yeah, it's lovely that there's that kind of parallel between the two male voice choirs, and talk about male voice choirs, that originally we were going to have a full male voice choir singing at least part of this song. It was going to be, we were going to have a string quartet played by us at some stage in the development of this. The song was originally in 3/4 when I first heard it, and we put it into 4/4.
Partly so we could have that that flute tune added.
Yeah,
because that was in 4. It was sort of felt like it was in 4/4.
It was Dr. Sri Kumar from KGF came across an old Tamil song that he recorded, and he sent it to us, didn't he? And then you, Neil, transcribed the tune of that for Jessica to play on the flute. We've lost Richard.
We have lost
Richard.
Somewhere. I'm waiting for him to come back on.
Maybe it's his. Maybe his internet's gone.
Oh no, it's dropping like flies.
Oh no!
No,
there's Frankie's back. We just lost Richard. He's not in the. He's not in the
waiting room. No. I think his internet must have dropped out.
Some internet issue.
Shall we listen to it anyway with Venki? I know Venki's got to go, haven't you?
Yeah.
Soon. So if we listen to this track and then
yeah, we can hear. I have little more time. We can hear.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. One of my favourite things on this is Pooja's vocal as well.
Oh, that's amazing. When she hits that low note, that gives me goosebumps.
Yeah.
Are we going for it then, even without Richard, or we wait for Richard?
Should we do a counting? Or we just crack on?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 2, 1, go.
And
Oh, this is the bit with the manky guitar bit, isn't it? Yeah.
That was with this guitar. I didn't have a proper microphone. It was just this thing. I just thought, oh yeah, do some. I wanted to send something to the others to say, would something like this be okay? So I just did it quickly and sent it over. But then it ended up just making it into the end product.
This is the guitars are so much like in this whole album. I want to personally compliment you that it's very clean. That's what I love about this whole thing.
The
Yeah, her
tone
voice
of
is just
Pooch's
beautiful.
voice. Oh, it's amazing.
Who is it did the flute? Was this you, Laura? It wasn't you, Laura, was it?
I wish it was me. No, it was Jessica, who was actually my flute teacher for a year or so.
She's played in Bollywood, hasn't she?
She played for Bollywood for a while. So she came and recorded at Cube Studios.
Here's your boys, Venki.
Yeah, great.
Incredible.
There is also a veena.
A veena, yeah.
Veena, which is supposed to be the national instrument of India.
Oh really?
Which is going in the background. All our boys love this choir.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
It's amazing being an honorary member of this choir.
Yeah.
You were, yeah.
How much would we have to organise, change, enable to get both choirs and all the instrumentalists all in the one place at one time?
It would be amazing.
There's any funds about that.
Yeah. If anyone wants to pay
Quite a lot
£1
of money.
million for us to do
thousand,
it.
yeah.
I think it's not just money at the minute that would stop us getting together, though, is it? It's also
COVID.
no international travel for.
Yeah, they'd have to be quarantined for a fortnight when they arrived. Unless we can quarantine them with us.
Instrumental bits moved about structurally as well during the evolution of this song, didn't they?
Oh, that's lovely.
This song for me, I remember hearing a story about Queen recording Bohemian Rhapsody and how nobody quite knew what the end result was going to be like until it was done. And this song for me was like that, in that it was such an epic that anybody sort of trying to suggest what it was going to sound like was a waste of time. You do this little bit and hopefully it'll sound all right, and then it just as the pieces came together, it's just incredible.
Yeah, it kind of sums up the whole album. I think the whole project, that one track.
Yeah,
very much, very much.
Okay. Oh, we don't want to sit again. Right, I'll whiz through this because we want some questions. But legacy for the project is an interesting one because obviously we had our launch party weeks before the country shut down, the world shut down, and so a lot of our plans, like we were joking about getting us all together in that song, but we had hoped to be able to go to India or have them come here. We'd been booked for Lorient festival into Celtique last summer, and Venki was going to fly over from India, and we were all going to be together. We were in the stages of planning a stage show and a play around the album. All that's on hold, but things that have come out of it, the relationships, I think, the people we've met, each other through the project. We've made so many amazing friends in Cornwall, like Pauline and Alison, but also the world. That's probably been, I think, the highlight. And hopefully it's raised the awareness that India was a place that Cornish people emigrated to, even if it was for just a time. And it should now be in that context when people are talking about Cornish emigration. I think another lasting thing has been the website, the fact that we're getting emails daily from people with a connection to it. So I think we will look at a way to rewind the past year somehow when all this COVID business is over, and see where we're at and try and find ways to move it forward, because I think it's important. It's important to us and it's important to a lot of people, I think. And one thing I should mention, I did briefly mention the KGF Schools Foundation. The project's not for profit, so all money that we raise through CD sales is split between Cornwall Heritage Trust and the KGF Schools Foundation. At some point we will be making those donations, but everywhere where we would have sold CDs, all the gigs we had booked have obviously been cancelled. So it's been a slower process than we would have liked, but that is where all the funds will be going to. And I think that's all from us. Sorry it's taken us a long time to get through it all. I'll hand over to Alison.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura and Richard. It's absolutely fascinating. And I love the stories of all the people who lived in the mining community and the diverse cultures, and also the musicians that you've brought together to create something that was really quite special and unique. And just wondering if there were any questions or stories that anyone else would like to share. You can either use the chat or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question.
I think there's a couple in the chat, isn't there, that Kathy's shared. So when did people start emigrating to India from Cornwall? And Laura, is it around 1893? Am I right there?
Yeah, the very late 1800s, but I think most were in the early 1900s. And Indian independence. By then, I think a lot had gone, but we do know people. Some were there right up until the 80s, but the majority were had left by then.
There was also another question: if somebody wants to buy the CD, where would they be able to buy it?
You can buy it from our website. We have a shop on the website, and you just fill in your details, and we will post it off as soon as we can.
There's another question. Are there influences from the Cornish on the music that was part of life at KGF?
Do you want me to answer it, or do you want to?
I think we looked into the brass band because the brass band's music went everywhere with the Cornish and choirs and stuff. And there is that legacy, isn't there, or of the brass music in India still? Because we had all sorts of plans for that, about commissioning Camborne Band to play something kind of more linked with Indian music, but yeah, do you want to carry on? That's as far as I can remember.
I think the Wesleyan influence and the hymns, obviously they continued, like Nyla, her mum still singing Lead Kindly Light. That's the hymn that would have been brought over when the Cornish were there. So those influences still remain, but so many people have now dispersed from the community. A lot have moved to Bangalore. So it's not the same place it once was, really, and it's kind of been filtered down, and those people have kind of gone all over now. So there are some influences still there, but that's kind of all we came up with.
There's an interesting comment, sorry to jump in. There's one here, M. Critchley, saying that Cornish miners were in India as early as 1830s, and that in the presentation we did to Bangalore International Centre, we talked a lot more about emigration, and that kind of earlier emigration, that the Cornish were emigrating, but it wasn't necessarily when they had to emigrate, that they had these amazing skills and were kind of headhunted and went all sorts of places. But then you get this mass emigration probably a little bit later of people kind of desperate for work at that point. So yeah, the Cornish, they did, yeah, there's somebody else says about links with Mexico as well, and they were going all over the world, and Trethewey obviously inventing steam engines and pumps and all those kind of things, and traveling the world to install those.
I think as well, what's unique in a way about the Kolar Gold Fields is that there was nothing there until the mines were set up. So when John Taylor and Sons went over, they built an entire community around the mines. So it was just, nobody was living, well, maybe a handful of people were living there beforehand. So it was like this, from scratch, this entire community was built up. That's kind of what made it so unique, I think, as well.
I think we've got a question from Kay. Kay's got a question she'd like to ask.
Hi there. I know you're principally looking through the lens of the music, but I was making a comparison here with the mass exodus that took place from Iceland, and I am not Icelandic, but I know a little bit about this, in very similar times, in hard times that went on between about 1870 and 1910, and how that affected the way people felt, because many of these people that went to Manitoba, Canada, and it was a bit like going to India, it was too far to come back. You only really had the letters, and I've read a lot of those letters. And you've got the situation there where the people would say they didn't feel that they belonged in Iceland, and they didn't feel that they belonged in Canada. And again, it was the same thing. They had to go and build the community, and very often what they were promised was not there. It was much harder than expected. And I just wondered, if you've studied anything about this kind of sense of cultural identity. Both people from both places took their music with them, took their poetry with them, and obviously that's part of their culture. But I'm just wondering, how many of these people actually came back? Did they come back did many of them come back to Cornwall, or did they make their whole lives in India?
There's an amazing, in the sleeve notes, there's reports of, he's called Prisk, isn't he? Is it John Prisk from Mullugan? And the West Briton reported on him. He went out in the early part of, what was it, 1919 around that time, but they reported on this in about 1945 that this was his 9th trip back and forth between Cornwall and India. So he by boat, obviously, at that time.
It was
So
pretty incredible in those days.
I think you'll find his name was Lionel Prisk, and he lived at Kolar Villa in Druids Road in Illuggan.
That's it. That's the report, yeah.
It's Sharon Schwartz, by the way, and I've devoted about 25 odd years to studying Cornish global migration. So I'm really delighted to come here tonight, and I'm living in Ireland, so I'm not in Cornwall at the moment.
Oh, wow.
So it's brilliant to hear about your project. I mean, great guys, well done. It's an excellent thing.
Fabulous.
Thank you for coming along. I've read your stuff. But yeah, no.
Quite a few. I think a lot came back to Cornwall, but also people went elsewhere in the world. So like when I talked about Bessie Hamill from Hale, after she died, her husband stayed there and remarried, and then his whole family emigrated to Australia. So I've been in touch with her husband's granddaughter, and then there's a family in Canada who went to India from Cornwall and then on to Canada. So I think it's quite a mix.
And it's not always the Commonwealth countries, because places like Mexico are not really, it's basically anywhere there are mines, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
the very earliest migration flows were actually to non-English speaking countries in mainly South and Central America, and that was on back of British capital in the 1824 mining boom, the capital boom of the London stock market. You had all these mining companies set up across Latin America and all recruiting Cornish miners in quite considerable numbers. So yeah, it was India came along a little bit later, but it's still very much part of the Cornish migration story of people constantly moving from place to place. And as you mentioned, John Taylor and Sons actually did open up the mines there after 1881. And you have a birds of passage. People were going to and from India, like we go to and from Plymouth or London today. And they could, because you had speedier and cheaper rail and sea links that enabled that to happen. And people living on remittances as well. So they're sending money home to their families in Cornwall. Some of my family were out in India on the Kolar Gold Fields. So
it's
very much a part. They were called Trethewey, I believe, but it is very much a part of the whole story of Cornish migration, which is unfortunately focused mainly on the English-speaking world, as somebody mentioned earlier. But there are many other places that experience considerable Cornish migration, but that they've been left out of the story. It's been dominated by Australia and America, but Mexico and all of the countries of South and Central America. Many Cornish miners went there, and also India, Malaysia, Burma, Thailand, wherever there's a hole in the ground, as we say, there'd be a Cornishman at the bottom of it.
I think in some ways, one thing that, I don't know that much about Cornish immigration. Certainly, Rich would know more, but I think from what I gathered, the experience at KGF was slightly different because they were in kind of managerial higher up positions. So it wasn't so much the kind of, under the ground kind of basic labour. They had these really lovely houses built.
That's been the same right the way through. The Cornish were the aristocracy of labour. So they were recruited, they were headhunted to go to South and Central America, and they were given jobs as mine captains, head blacksmiths. They ran the reduction departments. And the same in South Africa. They worked the drills underground, but because native people weren't allowed to touch them. And they were the shift bosses. It was the same right through America. It was the same the world over. The seen as the creme de la creme. They were the aristocracy of labour and the light infantry of British capital. So what happened in India is very similar to what's happened elsewhere before.
Okay.
Part of the same continuing story, if you like.
I was going to say that also created problems for them, I think, as well, didn't it? In the, in various places around the world, you get a lot of then segregation that, say, like the Irish workforce didn't appreciate being below, in this hierarchy of labour, didn't appreciate being below those kind of higher up positions. And it was quite a segregated life with kind of the Cornish areas and the Irish areas, and even fights between the two.
I don't want to butt in because I could talk endlessly about that. It's all about Kolar Gold Fields and you guys tonight, but no, that's what you're saying is true. That there were a lot of them lived in separate colonies. They're called the Colonia Inglesa in South and Central America, and even in Rio Tinto in Spain, they lived in a separate community. And that was repeated perhaps in Kolar as well. Where they had specific areas, bungalows that they lived in on the mines.
Yeah, fascinating. That's so interesting. I think because my mum is here as well, and Mum was born in the hospital, weren't you, in Kolar Gold Fields. There was another question. When will we be able to see you play live again?
$1 million question.
We'd like to know. Yeah. I think we are booked currently for Lost Fest in June. But currently we're booked for Lost Fest in June, and there's a big question mark over going to Lorient in the summer, which was saying it's going ahead, but now there's all the stuff. Who knows? But Lost Fest seems quite. I'd say that's quite certain. Would you, Rich?
At the moment, I don't think anyone's certain about anything in the world ever again. But yeah, Lost Fest is in Lostwithiel, if anyone doesn't know. So in June.
And does anyone else have any? Oh, Pauline.
This lady Pauline.
Laura or Richard, have you had any news of how KGF is coping with the current pandemic? Presumably the workforce who have gone into Bangalore are no longer allowed to travel. I was just wondering if anyone had heard how they were coping there. Any news?
I've heard. I haven't heard a lot, but I've heard bits and pieces from the KGF Schools Foundation.
Yes.
And I know that they've been putting together food packs for the community, for the children and their families. So I think they've been doing that throughout the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the children at the school, their parents are the ones going to Bangalore. So obviously, yes, they've not.
Yes.
I'm not, but I don't know more than that, really.
May I also just say something to Richard?
You may.
Happy birthday for tomorrow.
Oh,
yeah.
21 again.
Nothing to do with the project, but yeah, very much.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you very much.
Well, I think that's it. I don't know if there are any other questions. Talking about the Cornish miners in Mexico, in our next spring newsletter, which we send out to our members, there is actually an article from one of the students that we've helped fund, who's written an article about the miners in Mexico. So that would be, if anyone's a member, look forward to that popping into your mailbox soon. Well, thank you very much on behalf of Cornwall Heritage Trust and all of us watching this evening. I'd like to thank both you, Laura and Richard, for a wonderful and informative and very entertaining evening. And our next Story Cafe, takes place on Thursday, the 29th of April. And the next one will be led by Kenza Broadhurst. And she's studying for a PhD on the Cornish language. And she's also a recipient of the Cornwall Heritage Trust bursary. And our Eventbrite booking will be open next week. And we'll share the link if anyone would like to join us on that. And we'll also be sending it out in the newsletter as well. So
can I quickly just say thank you to people for joining from all around the world, at various time zones, I'm sure.